Then they traveled to Yankee Stadium for an early April game, and a kid pitcher from Toronto knocked on the door of fame. Billy Rohr on the threshold with a tremendous performance today. 8 hits in the game. All of them belong to Boston. Rohr winds. Here it comes. Fly ball to deep left. Yastrzemski is going hard. Way back, way back. And he dives and makes a tremendous catch. One of the greatest catches we've ever seen by Yastrzemski in left field. Everybody in Yankee Stadium on their feet roaring as Yastrzemski went back and came down with that ball.
And on the line with us is indeed Bill Rohr from now Palm Springs, California. Good morning, sir. How many times have you heard that clip?
Jack, I'm not sure. Good morning. It's been a while, but I've heard it once or twice.
I bet you have. And thank you for taking time out. Obviously, it's early in the morning. I am certainly thrilled as a Red Sox fan and certainly a fan that remembers 1967 and remembers your feat against the Yankees back in 1967 as well. Just a little sidelight, Bill. We're at WSYB in Rutland, Vermont, as you know. Ken Coleman on the call of that play and the call of course, your feat that day at Yankee Stadium and also the voice of the Red Sox. At one time worked here at WSYB in the late 40s. He actually got a start here, and he broadcast the Rutland Royals in the old Northern League, so it all kind of ties in together. But, as we look back, people know that Yastrzemski saved your no-hitter that day, and that was the first out. And then we all know that Elston Howard, with 2 outs, did get the single to right. But Ken Coleman mentions in that clip about the kid pitcher from Toronto. You were with the Red Sox AAA affiliate playing for Dick Williams the year before. Tell us a little bit about that, the experience the year before in Toronto before you were called to the majors.
Well, Dick was consistently very intense and was very much geared toward winning, and we actually did win the pennant in '66 in Toronto in the International League, and went to the playoffs, I think, against Columbus and defeated them. But Dick, for whatever shortcomings some folks may tell you he had with respect to player relations or public relations, he was consistent with respect to his approach to the game. He wanted all you had every time you had to give it, and if you gave it, you were going to be fine. If you did, you were going to hear about it.
Because that team did win at AAA the year before, and you were a rookie, you made your major league debut that day at Yankee Stadium. Was there a feeling throughout spring training? I know that famous quote Dick Williams said, "I honestly think we'll win more than we lose." Was there a feeling that maybe it would be a different type of year? Obviously, it's years upon years of mediocrity for the Red Sox.
Well, I think there was a feeling amongst guys like Yaz and some guys that had been around a while that perhaps things were a little bit different. For a good number of us, Mike Andrews and myself and guys that had not been with the Sox before, it wasn't necessarily a feeling that something was different because we hadn't experienced the mediocrity in the preceding years.
Red Sox
certainly the fans had experienced it, and I think that was where most of that feeling came from.
Yeah, I think there were only like 4,000 on hand or something like that opening day 1967. Now, this was opening day at Yankee Stadium. We're talking to Bill Rohr, and he came within 1 out of pitching a no-hitter in his major league debut. When did you know you'd get the nod in that game? Was it a surprise to you, or did you know a couple of days ahead of time? What was the story behind that?
Jack, my recollection is I knew a couple of days before because we opened at home against the White Sox, and Jim Lonborg pitched that game, and then we got weathered out the next game. So Dick wanted to maintain the rotation. We had a scheduled day off on Thursday, and I was going to be the third starter. So he just kicked it around to the point where I think I knew before we went to New York on Thursday that I was pitching on Friday.
Now, that happened to be the opening day at Yankee Stadium, and the opposing pitcher that day, I think people have to be really good at baseball trivia to know who was the opposing pitcher. I believe it was Whitey Ford, correct?
It was indeed.
Whitey Ford, of course, a Hall of Famer. So there you are, your Major League debut. It's Yankee Stadium, and you're going up against Whitey Ford. Did you have a butterfly or two, I would assume?
Oh, I think I had an entire aviary going on in my head for probably 48 hours.
Now, you go through the game, and, all right, it's the fifth inning, the sixth inning. I've told you before, I actually listened to a couple when I talked to you on the phone earlier in the week. My recollection is the last inning or two of that game. I was not listening up to that point personally, but I think a lot of Red Sox fans have, know where they were on that day and so forth. So you have a no-hitter going. How were the teammates reacting? When did you think you had a no-hitter going? You know, a lot of pitchers say, I didn't really know it. What was your situation?
Well, if you don't really know it, then you're not really paying attention. The notion that they didn't have a hit was certainly something that I was aware of from the get-go. Translating that into pitching a no-hitter is a little different mindset. I mean, when you're talking about you've got an out to go or 2 outs to go or an inning to go, now you're on the threshold of something. But when they don't have a hit through 3 or 4 innings, certainly you're aware of it, but you don't think of that in terms of a no-hitter. And my teammates were very predictably quiet about the whole thing. Nobody said anything to me from about the third or fourth inning on, which had been the course of events in the past because I had done, as it turns out, I did exactly the same thing in 66 in Toronto and in 65 in Toronto. And how's this for a little irony that both of those were against the Yankee AAA club. And both of them went to 2 outs in the ninth.
Wow. I did not know that. That is a little bit of trivia.
There's a little trivia that nobody in the world knows.
Yeah. That's something I'm going to file away. Bill Rohr with us, member of the 67 Red Sox, talking about his near no-hitter opening day at Yankee Stadium in 67. This was the original Yankee Stadium, by the way, not the one that we have now, the new one from 10 years ago, and the other one that was renovated. This was the real Yankee Stadium, the real house that Ruth built. So now, in my notes, I didn't look it up, and I'm doing this from memory. The almost base hit, was that Tommy Tresh? Who was that
yes.
hit the? Yeah, it was Tommy Tresh, and Yaz robbed.
Yes.
Obviously, we just heard the clip on that. So that was the first out of the inning. And then I have done my research on this. Then it was Joe Pepitone, right? And he flied out?
Correct.
Yeah, so there were 2 outs. And then it was Elston Howard. And tell us a little bit about the at-bat with Elston Howard, because as I understand, before Howard came up, did Dick Williams pay you a visit on the mound?
He did, and in the decades that have followed, Dick has said on, I think, every occasion given the opportunity that he regretted that visit to the mound, and he was convinced that he had somehow cost me the no-hitter by coming out there. The short response is no, he didn't. He had nothing to do with hanging a curveball to Elston Howard. The other part, I guess, of that story is I have no idea what he was doing out there, and I didn't at the time, and I can still recall that. I saw him coming, and I just remember thinking, what the hell does he want?
Great.
Hasn't spoken to me in 3 hours, and now he wants to talk.
Do you recall what he said specifically? What did he say?
No, I think generally the substance of it was to bear down and get this. I mean, it's just a soup can full of cliches about how you bear down, get this guy, and we'll go home and yada yada. Again, Jack, it fades over time because frankly, it was fairly faded at the time.
So you got 2 outs, nobody on, ninth inning, 1 out away from a no-hitter. We're talking to Bill Rohr, 67 Red Sox, and his near no-hitter against the Yankees. So you go to 1-2 on Elston Howard, and did you think you had him? From what I understand, you thought you had him struck out, right? Was there a close pitch? Russ Gibson, by the way, was the catcher who was in the minor leagues for several years, a Boston area boy, and he was the catcher that day. Was there a time where you thought you had Howard struck out?
Jack, the 1-2 pitch was a strike. Gibby stood up as if to signify that this one's over. Elston actually took a step across the plate back toward the Yankee dugout. Cal Drummond, the Hall of Fame umpire who was behind home plate, I'll never forget, his right arm got about halfway up, and then he got a cramp in his elbow or something. He stopped, and I've thought about it a time or two over the years, and my conclusion has been that Cal Drummond just couldn't ring Elston Howard up against that kid on that pitch. But I am here to tell you it was a strike, and it would have been strike 3.
Well, there you go. That close. Now, you went to 3-2. From what I understand, you already mentioned a curveball to Howard who looped it into right for the base hit. You had thrown fastballs up to that point, right? Is that correct? And then you went with a curveball on 3-2?
I don't remember the pitches that okay. Came before the 3-2. I remember the 1-2 fastball, which I believe was a strike, and the one that he hit actually broke in, and he sort of fisted it off of his hands, and that's why it looped over second base into right field. But whether or not it had been a straight diet of fastballs, I don't recall, Jack.
Okay, and so Elston Howard gets the base hit to right. The rest is history. The second baseman, by the way, was Reggie Smith in that game. Later, of course, for the most part, in the 67 and other years, the center fielder. And, Bill, as we talk about that, especially Red Sox fans, you came within 1 out of a no-hitter, and if you obviously with what happened later in '67, that was a big part of it. It was I know from your point of view, you'd rather have the no-hitter, of course, but it's probably the best publicized one-hitter in the history of baseball. In many ways, the legend grew because you were so close. Do you ever look at it that way, or not?
Well, Jack, I have said more than once that that 15 minutes of fame is dying really hard. And it's been doing so now for 50 years. I suspect maybe when you attach the result of that game onto the result of that season, they go hand in glove, and Kenny Coleman sort of mentions that or highlights that, if you will, in his introductions to the Impossible Dream album. I think fans have attached the effort to the season and the results during the season, and I absolutely appreciate it.
Yeah, I think if the Red Sox did not go on and have the kind of year they did, it probably would fade into history. Obviously, it would have been historic if you did get the Hall of Fame, but or the no-hitter, I should say, against the opposing pitcher, a Hall of Famer, Whitey Ford, as we mentioned. But because of what happened later on in the year, so you end up with a one-hitter. Elston Howard, of course, later on in the year helps the Red Sox win the pennant. He was the catcher when the Red Sox won the pennant in '67 on that last day against Minnesota, at least clinched the tie. Tigers had to split their doubleheader. Now, people know that you were not with the team, the rest of the year. As I understand, you pitched against the Yankees about a week later, right, and beat them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did. It was 1 week. 1 week later, exactly, on Friday night back in Boston.
And so you had 2 wins that year with the Red Sox, and I believe you picked up another win later in your career, so you had 3 wins. But what happened from that point on as to why you weren't a member of the team after that next game against the Yankees?
Well, I had some arm difficulties, and then I had to go into the Army for my 2 weeks of summer camp, which was absolutely appropriate. But the day I left to go to Camp Drum up in New York, the Red Sox traded one of our players over to Cleveland for Gary Bell, who was a very established pitcher. Gary came in, and in the 2 weeks that I was gone, I think he went 3 or 4-0. And when I came back, Dick indicated to me that he contemplated putting me in the bullpen to see if I could work through the shoulder issues. And then it was ultimately decided that it would be a better idea if I went back to Toronto and remained a starter. And so I did, and the Red Sox kept rolling, and the next thing you knew, it was September, and then I was back in Boston, and we got a couple more starts, and that was it. And the next spring, I was gone to Cleveland.
Now, when you were back in Boston, they have the call-ups now. That was part of the call-ups in September of that year, and so you were there in that monumental final stretch of the season. You were right there in the dugout when all the other stuff happened.
Yep, I was there.
What did you say to Elston Howard, by the way, when they got Elston Howard to play for them? Did you say?
My recollection is that I confirmed that the 1-2 pitch was strike 3, and he said, "Of course, it was not strike 3. That was his Hall of Fame umpire. He didn't call it a strike, did he?" So we had a little fun with it.
I bet. And I've seen the pictures, of course. Elston Howard signing the ball for you, and vice versa, I guess, too. We're talking to Bill Rohr. It came so close to a no-hitter against the Yankees in his Major League debut in that wonderful 1967 season. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you're of my generation and a Red Sox fan, you get it. If you're not a Red Sox fan, you don't get it anyway. And some of you of my generation don't get it anyway either, and there's nothing we can do about it. But, just a little bit back, some things in reading about this, Bill. After the game, you got to meet Jackie Kennedy, correct? And John, who was 6 or 7 years old or something. How did that come about?
Well, exactly how, or behind the scenes, what took place, I don't know. But I was in the dugout, and all the guys had been very congratulatory and what have you, and I got a hold of my jacket and was getting ready to go up the tunnel into the clubhouse, and somebody puts their hand on my arm, and I look, and it's not a hand with a sweatshirt on it, it's a hand with a suit and a white shirt, and a guy's got a tie and one of those ear mechanisms like the Secret Service wears. And he looks at me and he says, "Mrs. Kennedy would like to meet you." And I don't remember exactly what I thought, but my first thought probably was, who is Mrs. Kennedy? And then I looked over, and you knew right away who that was. And she had little John with her, and he had a ball, and he handed it to me, and she asked me if I would be kind enough to sign it. I wish I had had the presence of mind to get him to sign one for me. If the little nipper could have written, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't do it. I signed his and shook her hand. I remember she had on a white glove. Why somebody would wear a white glove to a baseball game, I don't know, but she did. And I remember my glove hand was the hand I was going to shake her hand with, and my glove hand was pretty dirty. It'd been through 9 innings of stuff. But she just stuck her hand out there and shook my hand, and she was very, very gracious, very, very friendly.
What a wonderful story. I don't know that a lot of people know that. I looked up, again, research. Steve Buckley from the Boston Herald had written about this, I believe, a couple of years ago on the 50th anniversary of 1967. I just a wonderful story. Another thing that I got from that, now when we're talking to Bill Rohr, Red Sox pitcher in 67, came within 1 out of a no-hitter against the Yankees in his major league debut. When I talked to you on the phone earlier in the week, I mentioned I've been in Rutland many years, but I originally grew up on the North Shore, and I told you what town, and you said, is it anywhere near Swampscott? And that's Tony C's hometown, Tony Canigliaro. And in that same game, now apparently Russ Gibson tells this, the late Russ Gibson, that Lee Remick, not only was Jackie Kennedy at the game, but the actress, the movie star Lee Remick, who I guess was born in Quincy, Mass. I did not know that. And Tony C. wanted a date with her or something, right? I mean, can you? And they asked an usher to pass a note to her or something like that. Do you recall that?
I don't recall that it happened because I wasn't paying attention to.
Well, yeah, I guess you were busy with a no-hitter.
Yeah, but I have certainly heard the story, and having spent some time as Tony C's roommate, my inclination is to accept all the rumors as true.
And apparently the message eventually did get to Lee Remick, and she responded, "Tony, wake up, Lee Remick." So, well, hey, it sounds good enough for me. I'll believe that forever. Bill Rohr with us, and just wonderful memories, Bill, for me, and I know for you as well. Now, the Jackie Kennedy's at the game, Lee Remick, of course, all the rest of the stuff. You did get a call from Ed Sullivan, right? And you thought it was a joke.
Yeah, when we got back to the hotel, there was a message in my slot that some agent had called from CBS, and my first thought was it was a couple of my teammates pulling a stunt. But I went upstairs and I returned the call, and I'll never forget the agent's name was Eddie Pitcher. And I returned the call, and this guy answered the phone, and he said, "Mr. Sullivan wants to have you on the show Sunday night. Can you do it?" And so on and so forth. Well, my first thought was, no, I can't, because we're playing the Yankees on Sunday, and then we're leaving for Chicago as soon as the game's over. But he said something about having contacted the Red Sox and so on and so forth. And so I talked to Dick about it the next day, and I was given permission to stay in New York Sunday night and then join the team in Chicago on Monday. So, indeed, I did get to go on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Do you still have the video, or I guess the film, maybe in those days, of that, or not?
I do somewhere, Jack, but if somebody put a gun to my head, I wouldn't know where to go start looking for
it. Okay, it was just one of those things that happened in that year, being on the Ed Sullivan Show. A couple of other things, Bill. How close were you to Tony C., Tony Canigliaro? Certainly close enough to know where he came from and all that stuff. Because I want to ask
Tony.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I'm sorry. How close were you to Tony C.? Were you?
Well, we were pretty close. Tony and I had been in the Army together in boot camp at Fort Dix, New Jersey. We were in the same company, same platoon. And then in '67, Tony and I lived together over in Kenmore Square the first couple of months of the season there. And but back when we were in boot camp in the winter time, in the winter of '65, I think it was, Fort Dix shut down for Thanksgiving, but they didn't tell the guys in boot camps that they were going to shut down. So nobody had a chance to make a reservation to go anywhere. I think they told us Wednesday night we didn't have to be back till Sunday. So Tony and I hired a limo and had him drive us to Boston, and I spent Thanksgiving with Tony and his family at his house. And Mrs. C made dinner, and it was wonderful. And the younger boys were there, Richie and Billy.
Yeah.
And Tony and I were pretty close.
Yeah, Billy, of course, played for the Red Sox a little bit later on as well. And people, to quote the Impossible Dream album, one August night, the Kid in Right lies sprawling in the dirt. The doctors say he be okay, who will carry us from here. And then there's the Carl Yastrzemski song and all that stuff. But as we all know, that fateful night, August of 1967. Now, you were in Toronto. You weren't with the ball club at that time when that happened. What were your recollections of the night that Tony C got hit in the head and, of course, basically ruined his career, and later, of course, he died way too young?
Well, my recollection is that the photographs today, they tend not to put particularly graphic pictures in the news. The pictures that I recall, his eye was completely swollen shut. The whole side of his face was rather grotesquely disfigured and purple. And I remember thinking that this could affect his eyesight from now on, and as it turns out, it did. That was a pretty stunning blow. And it was interesting because the guy that threw the pitch was known throughout his career to be a headhunter. And when you couple that with the fact that Tony had a tendency to lean over the plate, it was kind of a tragedy waiting to happen.
And we're talking about Jack Hamilton.
Yeah.
Of the Angels, every Red Sox fan knows that name, too, a name that will always live in infamy. I got to tell you, Bill, I could talk to you all day on this. We should have a part two, and we'll get you up again some early morning, a future show. But you went back for Tony C night in 1983. Tony C had a heart attack. It was Tony C night in 83, and I had forgotten about this because I was watching that night. That was also the day of the Buddy LaRue coup, right? The takeover and all on the same night. Unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your recollections of that?
Well, by 1983, I'd been a lawyer for 7 or 8 years, and I was busy trying to get my own new career going. And I wasn't really privy to all the politics that had gone on behind it, but I remember it was a very hot topic in Boston. And Haywood Sullivan was out, and the Yankees were out, and LaRue was in, and all the guys were just sort of looking at each other going, well, what the hell is that all about? And nobody, as I recall, had an awful lot of insider information.
Yeah, it was a night for Tony C, and all that happened in the same night. And I didn't recall that was the same night until I looked back to again look at some of the information for the show, and I had forgotten about that. But the Buddy LaRue coup that night as well. Just one or two other things, Bill. I'll let you go. The last couple of days of that fantastic '67 season, Rico Petrocelli, and there's pandemonium on the field and all that stuff. What about that day? What is it about that day that, outside of the rest of us remembering that day, that sticks out with you?
I remember Lonborg was pitching, and I think it was against Dean Chance, although I'm not sure of it. And we weren't doing anything offensively, and then Lonborg laid down a bunt and beat it out to first, and we wound up scoring 3 or 4 runs that inning. And that just ignited the whole place. The other vivid recollection I have is that after our game was over, we had to wait while the Tigers played the Angels in Detroit on the second game of that doubleheader, because if the Angels won that game,
it would have been a tie.
Detroit won that game. If Detroit won that game, we had to go to Detroit the next day for a one-day playoff.
Right.
We're in the clubhouse. Our bags are packed. We're ready to go to Detroit, and Jim Fregosi gets a double or a triple or something in the 7th or 8th inning, and the Angels beat him, and we win the pennant.
Yep, Dick McAuliffe hit into a double play, and the rest is history. How much do you keep? Are you on top of the major league scene now? The Red Sox finally winning the World Series and finally doing it, and they've won a few. Are you still a Red Sox fan or not?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And here where I live, we've got a lot of people that are, nobody's from Palm Springs. Everybody comes to Palm Springs from someplace else. And we have a number of people from New York, a number of people from Canada, a lot of Yankee fans, and we have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I bet. Matter of fact, I know somebody that's from this town that lives in Palm Springs, California, as well. What a pleasure, Bill. I'm going to let you go. As I said before, I could talk to you all day, but I really appreciate it. You're in Palm Springs. It was early in the morning out there when we called you. I know you're a lawyer out there, and you have. I know you're a grandfather, and enjoying yourself out with that great weather. We're expecting a huge snowstorm later today. By the way, Bill, people that live in California probably go ha ha ha, that type of stuff. But
Jack, it's a little chilly here as well. It's going to be 73 today.
Oh, too bad.
But we're gonna get through it. And I would like to take the opportunity to say hello, please, to Mo and her big dog Watson. She is the McGinnis of whom you speak, and she's a dear friend, as is her fiance, Ian Watson.
All right, and I know they're listening because she has been in contact with me on Facebook and so forth, and again, a wonderful family here, and that's how we got the connection to you. I got to tell you, Bill, it has been an honor for me as being a member of, Red Sox Nation. It was born in 1967, Red Sox Nation, and you were a big part of it. Thank you very much, sir. Have a nice day, and hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.
Jack, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bill Rohr, ladies and gentlemen, who came within 1 out of a no-hitter against the Yankees in his Major League debut in that dream season, the impossible dream season of 1967 for your Boston Red Sox.